Hi, I'm John Evans, and I'm here to do a book chat from Keystroke International. So we're going to try and do a series of these. We've been trying to do them in front of every show, but it's not always possible for us to get that done. Where we just have a quick talk about a book. Hasn't been quick so far, but a quick talk about a book that we've all read and hopefully enjoyed. I'm going to do a sequence of these to cover the first anthology that's by Keystroke Medium, and that's Kingdoms of Iron and Stone, and it's an anthology of 14 epic fantasy stories. So hopefully these will give you some idea of what the stories in the anthology are about, and this might be your introduction to some of these authors. So without further ado, the first story in the anthology is Unchosen by Rick Partlow. I'm going to try and keep off real spoilers for these, but if you're really spoiler averse, I would suggest just buy the anthology and read them, rather than listen to me try and talk about these without giving away anything that you might need, might need to not know before you read the book. So I really enjoyed Unchosen. I particularly enjoyed the way that Rick played into the tropes of the questing heroes, and they start out from an inn, which, if you're a role player, is a really familiar trope that we use in gaming in particular, but also you'll find it in all sorts of epic fantasy stories. You might find that there's a reason for that. If you look into the backgrounds of any of your favorite epic fantasy stories since the invention of role-playing as a proper gaming system, you'll find that most, if not all of them, are role players, and quite a few of the major ones actually were a role-playing game in some form before the author or authors committed them to the page. So yeah, I mean, I found it a very familiar story from the outset, and that's a very good thing. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, aren't tropes bad things? Doesn't that mean you're writing the same story over and over again? And well, you are. There aren't that many different types of story out there, and the tropes are there for a reason. Just because your story has recognizable tropes in it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. You'll often get people making outrageous claims about stories, such as, oh, stories have to be unique and they have to be completely original and they shouldn't contain anything, that's the same as other stories that have been told. It's one of the least helpful ways to teach people about writing that I've ever encountered, but I have heard it all over the place from English teachers and critics and people reviewing things in magazines and online and what have you. The idea that a story shouldn't repeat things that have been done before, well, there are no stories that haven't been done before. We've been telling stories for so long that biologists frequently refer to us as the storytelling ape, and describe the evolution of the human species as being fundamentally connected with the telling of stories. It was the telling of stories that is credited with us developing the power of speech and the ability to tell the other apes in our tribe what was going on around us. It went from being ook ook ook, whatever the librarian is saying in Terry Pratchett's works, and if you don't get that reference, then get thee behind me, but ook ook ook, to tell people where the fruit was, to I think the fruit might come back at this time of year, maybe we should go back to those trees. That's storytelling. It's a capacity that we have that, with the possible exception of the other primates, we haven't identified any other animals that can tell stories in quite the way that we can. Although interestingly, some animals have been shown to be able to lie, which is fantastic and has got to be one of the bases for telling stories in the first place. But it's complicated in that you have the ability as a human to imagine things that aren't happening right now. But there's only so many slots that those stories fit into. Is it a romantic story? Is it a coming of age story? You know, whatever categories you break these down into, you can, all the stories that have ever been told can be put in these categories. And there's a huge amount of academic work on what are the perfect categories to put stories in, how should you define them. And while they don't all agree with each other, I think the thing that they do agree on is that there aren't an infinite number of stories. There are a very, very large number of ways you can combine words in the English language or any other language to tell a story of the same style, but you're still telling one of the basic story forms. And it's not shameful or bad. It's a good thing. If you were to deviate from the tropes too much, probably what you've done is write something that people won't enjoy. You know, like yeah. I could give some examples of TV that I don't like, but I don't want to upset people. But anyway, so when I say Rick's story plays into the tropes, that's a good thing. But he also plays with the way that we kind of expect the tropes to go. From the very start, I recognise what's happening in this story that he's written. I'm familiar with the way it begins. So the story is about Veratus, who's a court wizard, and he seeks the help of Captain Theron Gerronson, who leads a band of mercenaries. Veratus has a mission from his regent and needs the captain's help to make a return trip through Bandit country to complete his mission that he's been assigned by the current regent of their country. So the journey allows Rick to offer glimpses of the world that the characters live in, and the types of people the named characters are, and some of the events in their background that got to this point in the short story. He gets all this done without doing big dollops of exposition. And for anybody who's unfamiliar with the terminology of story, exposition is where you have one of the characters deliver a big speech in which he explains, well, the reason that we have to go and do all this is because X, Y, and Z is true, and therefore we need a young hero to go and do this, and it's because this, and they explain the whole plot. You might find it lampooned with Morgan Freeman doing the voiceover for films, which sometimes is because that's used as a device in films because they're not very good. So they have somebody do a bunch of exposition just to explain what's on screen, because when they come to edit it, they realize this doesn't work at all. People can't understand the story. So we'll just have somebody do a voiceover. Morgan Freeman happens to be probably the best person for doing voiceovers like that for some reason, but I'm sure he's done plenty where it works, but it can be mishandled when you're trying to reveal things. So the rule of thumb that is usually given is show, don't tell. Don't write into your stories, oh yes, this is why this has to be done. Show the characters dealing with what you want to explain, and let the reader infer from that how the world works. You certainly can put an exposition in stories. These are guidelines, not laws, but it will be immediately obvious to most readers if you're spoon feeding them large amounts of information and you want to give them information throughout the book rather than do it as one big chunk at the beginning. You know, your editor is going to point that out to you if you've done it, and they'll probably be rolling their eyes, but be nice to you the first couple of times you do it. What Rick does in this is he manages to get out a lot of detail about this world, or at least what felt in my head like a lot of detail, without actually having it break the flow of the story. It all feels like there's natural conversations going on and people thinking about the world around them. And you know, this is a short story, so to achieve that in a short story, you've got to use very, very short pieces of text to just provide enough color. There's a great comment that I've seen Patrick Rothfuss make. Somebody complimented him at a convention on one of his fight scenes, and they said, "Oh, it's amazing, and the way the guy does this and the other guy blocks it and does that and does this." And, you know, and this guy describes to him this fight and how fantastically written it was. And Patrick Rothfuss just sort of shrugs and goes, "I didn't write that at all. You wrote that all in your own head. All I did was give you subtle hints to let you write your own sword fight scene in that when you were reading it." And that's excellent storytelling. So you ultimately, it doesn't matter what you put on the page, the reader is still going to have to imagine it in their own head. You say somebody's got red hair, they could be imagining any of the types of red hair out there. So if it's not something you want to pin down, your reader's picture of your characters will definitely be different to yours, and you don't necessarily need to describe everything in detail. If you are writing fantasy and you have orcs in your fantasy, you can describe them, but you don't have to put in detail for fantasy readers these days to know basically what an orc is. Nor do you have to describe a sword. If you say something is a scimitar, everybody over the age of about 8 knows what a scimitar is, especially if they read fantasy. So you use short versions of what you could talk about in order to build pictures in the mind of the reader. And you've got the two-pronged approach. You can either go into heavy detail and describe it so that from your perspective as a writer, the reader probably is thinking about the same thing as you, or you can hint at things and let the reader build their own picture. You take the characters into an interrogation room. You don't need to say any more than that. If they know it's the 1920s, they're picturing a smoky, like run-down room and wooden chairs and stuff. But if they're picturing, the present day, then they're probably thinking there's a steel table. It's probably got clamps built in so they can cuff people to it, and there's a two-way mirror in there and stuff. They know what an interrogation room is, and they'll fill in the detail themselves. So Rick, in his story, manages to get across a whole bunch of things about the world that made me think, oh yeah, I know what's going on there, and I know what the world looks like, and I know where they're going in the world. So I'm filling in probably a whole lot of details that Rick has only had to hint at, and he does that really well. It's great. So they go out on this quest, the wizard and the band of mercenaries, and it's very hard to do this without spoilers. But the completion of the quest isn't the end of the narrative that Rick's telling, and there's a nice twist in the tale which he accomplishes really well, and it gives the extra kick that a short story needs to become complete. You'll find reading, if you read enough short stories, there is a common style that the good short stories tend to have, and that is that there's usually some kind of twist, is probably an oversimplification, but we'll use that. Usually some kind of surprise twist, fake out in there, or something, because you've got to lend punch to the end of the short story, because you don't have lots of time to build things up and then have you can't have a massive third act of your story as you would do in a novel, or even a novella. Short stories maybe up to, I think, 17,500 words is the. No, hang on, is that wrong? No, maybe not. Maybe maybe a novelette finishes at 17,500 words. But the point is, there are, you can look them up on the Science Fiction Writers of America. They've got a list of how long a short story versus a novelette, novella, and then novel are. And most people just tend to use their word counts these days. But the point is, you don't have a vast amount of space to deal with these things in a short story, so you have to get in and out very quickly in order to meet the constraints of word count, and that is tricky to do, and it means you tend to have fewer characters, you tend to have less detail in description, and you want a punchy ending. You can't have a self-indulgent ending of any kind, or have multiple endings, which, despite what some people say, works extremely well in The Lord of the Rings. And I will fight you over that in every respect, bar the one where we actually have to, punch people, because I'd rather be drinking a gin and tonic or eat something than actually having a fist fight. But you're still wrong if you think The Lord of the Rings multiple endings is bad. So what Rick's done here, you can really picture the epic fantasy world that he's built, and that's in the background of this. And I can certainly imagine reading a trilogy that this story would lead into, or perhaps I could see it as a 20 years earlier, this is what happened, and then this is where the world is now. Yeah, if Rick ever writes that, I would certainly be putting that on my wish list. And I really enjoy the story. I think it's a great way to open an anthology of epic fantasy short stories. And with that, that's all I've got to say about Unchosen by Rick Partlow. I would highly recommend you buy Kingdoms of Iron and Stone. And what I hope to do is try and but talk about the rest of the stories in the anthology over the coming weeks. So you can get it on Amazon, and I think that's about all I have to say about it for the time being. Welcome to Keystroke International, a destination for readers, writers, either or both. I'm John Evans. I'm here today with Devon Ford, and today we're going to be talking about book covers. But first, Devon hasn't been on the KSI show yet so far, or most of you will probably be familiar with him in any way. But Devon, if you could just introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, yeah, I'm Devon Ford. I write post-apocalyptic sci-fi mostly, into military sci-fi at the moment. I've got the After It Happens series, the Leah Chronicles spin-off for that, in Audible with R.C. Bray, Kate Reddin. My current series, the expansion series, just finished book 4, and that is going off to the one and only Luke Daniels to be recorded next week. So hi everyone.
That's great. So have you been up to anything recently that you want to mention, or?
Well, January was a big month. Put in my, people are going to groan now, word counts. I put in my highest word count ever of a month, just over 106,000 words. Ended up with a 4-day migraine, which is why I'm only just getting back to the computer at the start of February. But yeah, it's been busy. I've got a pre-order out on the 15th. I've got another one at the end of this month, 2 new audibles on the go. So a lot of things juggling right now.
That's great. Okay. So we're going to talk about book covers and why they're important, and why the way that people think about book covers is often flat out wrong. There's that common phrase that people use: "Don't judge a book by its cover."
Yeah, and well, the meaning of that, meaning to not judge people by what you see, is absolutely right. But if taken literally, don't judge a book by its cover is completely wrong, because that's exactly what a book cover is for. It's there for you to allow the reader to make instant judgment over how much heart and soul and effort has gone into what's inside. So in terms of judging books by their covers, quite literally, I think you really should.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that is the whole function of a book cover. and they, you know, ever since they were able to put pictures on covers and really go into the graphic design of the cover, that has been true. And earlier you would have looked inside and there might well have been, you know, a woodcut or an illustrated, illuminated panel that would have been part of what you would have used to judge what the book was about. But in the modern era, you're looking at covers that divide books by genre. And when you go into a bookshop, whether that's online or in the physical space, you're going to immediately be able to pick out which books are in the genres that you actually want to read, or the one that you happen to be looking for that day.
You also think they've nowadays the majority's online, so your covers have got to be right, but they've got to work in a thumbnail as well. Yes,
absolutely, yeah, because you can't, when you look at it in a thumbnail, which is maybe an inch and a half, 2 inches tall, you can't distinguish all of the details, but your eye automatically picks up a huge amount of information, even from a tiny little thumbnail. You'll see that there are characters on it. You'll see maybe there's spaceships and planets on it. Maybe there's a silhouetted figure. You can usually read the title, but your brain is making snap judgments because it recognizes patterns. So it will go, oh, that's a pattern I recognize. And as an author, you want that to happen.
Tropes either, the whole spaceship in battle over a planet's clearly not Earth, whilst it's overused in some ways with many different books of the same genre, it's not at the same time, because if that's what you're looking for, that's exactly what you're going to get. So you automatically get that comfort, that recognition of this is my kind of book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the perspective of an author, when you encounter people who are new to publishing books, the first thing they'll say is, I want my cover to show my characters doing this scene in the book, and it's going to be really cool because it's a great scene and it's emotional, or it's exciting, it's a great action adventure. So I need a cover designer who can put that on the book.
Yeah, like I say, common mistake. It's also the same kind of mistake that they'd write in the book. They'd go through with editing. They're making the assumption that the reader automatically knows what's in their head as opposed to the picture they painted. That cover, you can depict scenes from books. It's been done successfully. It's been done not so successfully. But I firmly believe you've got to stick with a concept that is exciting but still puts that reader at ease, so they do know what they're going to get. There was a comment over a year ago by one of my fans about book covers being a book cover was a wonder bra, because on the outside the cover looked amazing, it gave so much promise, and then when they got inside they realized it wasn't actually what they'd been sold. So it's kind of like a bit of a trade descriptions act, but it's got to be right for the story. It's got to give that impression of what you're getting, what you're going to get inside, and it's got to be on point. It's got to be on the message. You can't have a cover that's way more exciting than what you've written, and you can't undersell your book either.
Yeah, and that's true in all genres. In romance, you have man chest, and that impossible body images to live up to, or at least
it's not impossible. You just don't have to have a carb between now and 2025.
yeah. I mean, I'm not there. In military science fiction, which is what I mostly write at the moment, what we call spaceship arse, which is just, nice flattering shots, the Manchester equivalent, but with a spaceship, and possibly some explosions.
Yeah, and not to use my own prop, but I've got the absolute perfect one for the post-apocalypse as well.
Yeah.
Sunset shot, man with dog, man with gun. That was the original one for my series. It's been redesigned since then. But when you take a look at the general genre and covers, it's very much one person looking out over the skyline at the destruction of what was. And now John's gone because he hasn't got his props ready.
Yeah, John did not have his props ready, but I can show this as well, because so my brother and I write together, and we got some advice last year saying, if you want to get to the next level, update your covers, because they're just not they're not on point enough for military science fiction, which we write. So here's the original cover for Commando, and I realise at this point that I'm probably going to have to reverse the video somehow, so I'll have to work out how you do that. But so it's a spaceship. It's quite clear, but it's got a particular style to it. That's Gorilla, which is a big guy in power armor and a base and a planet, you know. And that's the third book. That's Ascendant, another big spaceship. Now they've all got a particular style, and we were very happy with these covers because they sold a significant number of books and they were cost effective. So for the readers out there, most authors will be familiar with this already, but new authors might not be. There are basically two types of covers that you can get. There are pre-made covers, and then there are custom covers. Pre-made are ones that cover designers have created. It might be one that somebody that they did for an author, but it wasn't used, so it stays with the cover designer until they can sell it. Or they might just do a number on spec, and sometimes they'll even do them in series, so they'll do a trilogy of book covers in the same theme, and they're generally cost effective because there's not much in the way of choice. You find a pre-made cover that you like, and you buy it. Whereas if you're getting custom covers, you've got more choice over it, but you shouldn't be telling your cover designer.
Sorry, should we just address that? My wife just tried to sneak out the room, completely failing to miss the camera. Carry on, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, so if you're looking to buy a cover and you're going to an artist, so let me go back a step. So last year when we were told get new covers and then it'll help you push you to the next tier of engagement and sales. We found a cover designer who is very well known in the sci-fi community and does work to a high standard. And when I tried to explain to him what the first book was about, he immediately cut me off. And we were sat at a conference in Las Vegas, and he said, "No, I don't want to know about that. I don't need to know about it. What we need to do is find a cover that tells people that it's military science fiction. So I can create custom ones for you, or I can do, or we can use some of my existing pre-mades." So that is the new cover for Commando. It's much brighter. It's got serious action going on. There's more than one ship. So as a reminder, we're going from this one to this one. I can see those reasonably well. Yeah, and this one says military and explosions and action. This one says science fiction. It doesn't say military science fiction necessarily. It could be, if Commando, the title kind of gives away what's going on. But
unless we're talking about Space Marines who don't wear underwear yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we paid a significant amount of money for those covers, significantly more than we paid for the pre-made covers. And don't get me wrong, we were happy with the pre-made covers. We made very good money off those covers, and it was, we didn't have a budget to spend on other covers to start with. And those are the next two now. They're, again, much more on point. So if you're a new author and you've got covers and you look at them, you should be able to look at other covers in your genre and look at them and say, my covers are similar to the other covers.
They've got to be on point with the genre, but still unique, still you. You say about reaching the next level. I did the same thing with my first series. So I had 6 books of the first series. They're the old covers I showed you at the start one there. They've been redesigned since for a big launch. I've got those traditionally published, not self-published. They were redesigned for a big launch to push for wider distribution. I've done spin-off series from that to give you an example of what the current market wants. They've all been redesigned. The 8th book is like this as well, into that kind of hard-hitting style. Which, again, for new authors, if you're worried about how much a cover costs, if you find the right designer, top designers who are well known and are in high demand aren't cheap, and neither should they be. But there are many designers out there. I use my own designer, and I've got another designer I go to for specific 3D modeling work. But my initial designer is so good that the traditional publisher I work with for some of my books, I've insisted that they've used her as well. So that makes me sound very diva, but they use her as well, purely because I know how she works. She's designed a number of covers for me and other authors that I've worked with on multi-author series and stuff like that. But a good custom cover isn't as expensive as people would think. I go back 3 years. I actually put my first 3 covers on the last space I had on a credit card to get them done, because the other alternative was asking someone if they could knock something together, doing it myself, which anyone who's published any books should have these klaxons going off behind them now. The idea of doing your own cover only works for some people and only works in certain circumstances. A friend of ours actually does his own covers for a series of shorts, but they wouldn't be any more successful, and they're great books, if he'd throw money at cover designs for them. What he's got really works, but that's not to say that doing your own covers will work every time, unless you're a cover designer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the things about cover design is even if you're reasonably good with graphics, just choosing the fonts alone and getting that right is a skill. It's not, you can't just pick out, you know, it's not Arial, you can't use that. You've got to find real fonts, and ideally you want them to be branded. So when you look at that, we've got this wing motif here. Yeah. We've got consistent branding.
You've got that series recognition.
And we even had consistent branding on the pre-mades, because the guy who did those, Dan Van Os, is a really he's a really friendly guy, and he was perfectly happy to do that. But sometimes with pre-mades, you know, it would be, you know, you would have to ask. But most cover designers doing pre-mades would be happy to, you know, if you're going to buy several, they'd be happy to make fonts and stuff consistent. But
yeah, absolutely. I also don't think we should shy away from actually naming our designers. So I use Claire Wood through a UK company called Spurwing Creative. She's done on my website and everything as well. I'd actually be lost without her for the start of my writing career. Going on to more recent stuff, my sci-fi, custom 3D modeling. That's Jamie Glover at Cerulean Future, and he is absolutely top quality, in high demand. And I actually nagged him this morning, asked him to go sick from his day job to actually get my covers finished for book 4 so I can get it on pre-sale.
Nice.
Not with anything, if anyone actually watching this sees our books and wants the contact information or anything else to talk about you know, their covers or anything like that, more than happy if anyone's just to contact us.
Yeah, likewise.
The authors are actually a friendly bunch. We do help each other out quite a lot.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good tip. If you find if you see a book and you're looking for a cover and you see a cover that suits in your genre, if you look inside, a lot of us, we do it, will actually credit the cover designer on the first few pages. Yeah. So our first one was Dan Van Os of Covermint Design, and on our second one is also a sci-fi author himself. Well, actually, Dan Van Os is an author as well. The new covers are from Christian Callias, because he does big spaceships and battles, and he does military sci-fi stuff. So he was a good person for us to go to. But what I would say is that it's generally speaking, it's a bad idea to do your own cover. As Devon said, some people get away with it. There's a guy called Barry Hutchison who does a series called Space Team, and it's a comedy series, so he does comedy sci-fi covers, but he actually does put quite a lot of work into them. He is now going through and changing those covers. So if you look up Space Team, you'll see what I mean about them. But he did that to cut costs, and he had enough skill to get it done. Most of us don't have enough.
Yeah, the only thing I can draw is graffiti on dirty vans.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no way I'd even begin to try and do my own cover art.
Yeah.
I personally, I think unless you've got the skills or the contacts, it's like editing. There is no alternative to actually having it done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Not to bash anyone, not to sound derogatory at all, but just put in a Google search of bad book covers and you'll see exactly what we mean. Yeah. You'll get minutes of fun just looking through and wincing at the train wrecks you see on there. But I consider this the self-publishing without an edit, without a professional design, is exactly the same as people going on a program over here called Britain's Got Talent. I'm sure other countries have their own version of that, but I always wonder, these programs, they don't like to show you the talented people. They'll give you hours of people who really shouldn't be allowed to go on there by themselves. Who cares enough about these people to stop them doing it? Yeah. I'm sure you can figure out what I'm on about. Everyone loves to see the train wreck, but as a self-published author, you have got to accept criticism from beta readers, from fans, from peers. You've got to take advice from everywhere. Even me, 18 books in, I still don't have a clue what I'm doing about most things, and I will ask the people I know, and I'll accept the help and advice. And when I've got it figured out, I'll spend my whole day helping other people. But I don't think I ever will get it figured out, because 3 years in, I still haven't figured out pretty much anything, other than to get a book uploaded in less than 2 days. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a fan of bootstrapping your books if you're a new author. Now, that's highly dependent though on do you have money that you can seriously invest in your business. If you're a stockbroker in the city, don't do that. You don't need to. You can afford to go and get decent covers, but again, I wouldn't splash out on the highest end of covers until you've actually proved that your books are going to sell at all. But there are ways that you can get good covers that are genre appropriate at decent prices. And as I say, we more than made our money back on our first set of covers. And the only reason that we changed is so that we can position ourselves to move to the next tier, and take our sales to the next level by making sure that our covers are exactly what people expect to see in that particular niche. There are a number of ways that you can bootstrap your author career, and in covers, if you genuinely have the skills, you can learn to do cover design yourself. But for most of us, I think it's it's too much of an extra thing to learn when we're early in our careers. So you can get a pre-made cover. They can be very cost effective. From $50 to $100 can get you a cover that will suit. And then there's nothing at all to stop you upgrading a cover at a later date.
No, not at all. So
yeah.
I'd had 2 years almost before I upgraded my covers. If it wasn't for a traditional publisher pushing for bigger distribution and a relaunch as such, then I don't think I would have done for, I'd say, probably another year or two. Because they were selling and there was no need to do it. The point I guess we're making is it doesn't cost £1 million to have your books professionally packaged, but can you afford to lose revenue on people seeing your thumbnail, pulling a face, and not bothering with what's inside?
That's the point. That's the point where I would say that in terms of bootstrapping your career, you can't. The cover is the thing that you can't skimp on as easily as you can other things. You can approach other authors that you know who are in your position, or editors who and try and get deals and trade services back and forth and things, and get a reasonably good edit and have it good enough with ARC readers giving advice and so on that it will be a perfectly acceptable read.
It would be saleable.
But your cover is different. If you don't have a good enough cover,
you can't skimp on that. You can have lots of hello treacle.
Hello, darling. How are you?
Hi, Ralph.
Very good. Ralph Kern, everybody.
So Ralph, we're just in the middle of talking about book covers, and we're just talking about how important it is to stress that of all the things that you can bootstrap, designing your own cover, unless you are actually a cover designer, is a tough sell to actually make that work.
And a potential train wreck.
Yes, more likely, in honesty, to be a train wreck than you are to come across a cover that's going to work really well. And even if you're a graphic designer of some kind, unless you're in the field of book cover design, you really want to do a lot of research before you do it. Another thing you can do, of course, is that there are two elements to your cover, which is one is the picture, the other is the fonts. So if you're genuinely good at the graphics, but you don't really get book cover fonts, you can go to a cover designer and say, this is the picture I've decided I want to use. Can you give me some genre appropriate fonts for it? And there are people who will be able to do that for you. So remember that a lot of these jobs are broken down into separate things. For instance, in editing, you've got several different types of editing, from line editing to developmental editing, and then proofreading. Those are all different jobs that you can break down into discrete chunks. And it is actually the same with covers, but most cover designers who do it for a living are able to do both things for you. It's rare, but there are actually artists out there who generate the original art, and they may not be able to do the fonts for you, but
typography is definitely a field in of itself, something where as much thought has to be put into making sure that the text on the cover is it fits in with the picture and so on and so forth. For an example, if you had a science fiction book with some kind of Baroque text on it, unless you wanting to quite deliberately send some kind of message around that, then they might not complement each other. And I'd respectfully sort of add a third sort of tier to the topic of covers. So to my mind, there's three elements, albeit generally you can find that two of them are rolled into one. The first is cover art, which obviously is often a spectacular picture, but it has to be designed to operate on a cover, on the size of the layout of what a cover looks like. So, you know, taller than it is wide, unless you're talking audio book, which itself is a different type of cover. Then you've got the typography, so the fonting, and whatnot. The third is simply the cover design itself. So where do you put that typography on there? Where do you lay out the series name as opposed to the series title? Where do you put your own name? Things like that. All form an important part of the whole, which is your cover. When often, I mean, in my own journey towards sort of, without sounding pretentious, my own journey into finding out about cover art, I always sort of like first focused on the cover art, which is always a good place. Then I sort of started to learn the intricacies or become aware of the intricacies of the other two elements of it, and I think that difference does start to show as the indie community especially is professionalizing itself.
Yeah, is it you've got in terms of the story, you've got the tropes that come out in most genres. It's similar with the actual covers. It's more of an industry standard as opposed to like a repetitive story arc. So that industry standard, as John and I was saying earlier, it lets the reader, even from the thumbnail, know exactly what kind of book they're looking at, because they recognize it as being of that genre that they're looking for, because of the placement of text, the type of text, and the type of graphic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's got to be unique enough to stand out, but similar enough to the others so that people know they're getting what they want, and it's within their comfort zone.
Yeah,
I frequently see people come on the major forums and so on, and they say, oh, I want my thing to be, I want it to be unique, I want it to be special, I want it to be a snowflake, not that kind of snowflake for any Americans listening, you know, the one with the, you know, lots of detail in it that makes them genuinely unique, and they're wrong, right? I should probably say probably in the 20 books group, they would encourage me to say hashtag probably. You know, maybe my opinion isn't right, but here I'm just going to say, look, you don't actually want to be unique. You don't want your story to be unique. You don't want it to be some kind of special story type that you've invented. If you think you can do that, then you probably need to just learn a little bit more about story. All our stories fit into, you know, certain categories, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there isn't anything wrong with your book cover reminding people of other people's covers. What you don't want to do is have your science fiction book cover remind somebody of that horror book that they were just reading. You don't want your romance cover to tell people that you're doing a crime thriller, because the moment they see the cover, if they see a different genre in your cover than the one that your book should, you know, belongs in, they are gone. In that 2 seconds, they've looked at your Amazon page, they've looked down a list of big books, they've seen it in a bookshop, whatever it is, they've done a snap judgment in a couple of seconds, and they've moved to the next book that they haven't read, because there are another 1,000 books that they haven't read.
But there's absolutely, that's absolutely on point, John. I think that there's several buy decisions that come into into someone deciding whether they want to buy your book as opposed to anyone else's book. I've kind of loosely broken it down into 3 for my own sort of, or three stages for myself, and I'm sure other people have different measures of this, but this is what I use. That first is simply cover. Yeah, that's the first buy decision point. You have a look at the cover, you judge that book by its cover. So you've got to get through that first buy decision point before you get to the second buy decision point, which is the blurb, and then the third buy decision point is normally the look inside, or have a flick through a couple of pages in your bookstore, or the look inside feature on the website, on the Amazon site. Arguably, you can say there's a 4th buy decision, which might well be recommendations, which either come through friends, through Facebook groups, or alternatively just through simple editorial reviews on the blurb. But still, I think that, to my mind, that's slightly separate. If you're just looking at a book raw, if you're looking at 3 or 4 unrecommended books, then they're the 3 buy decision points you need to get through. So that's why
let's not forget prices is a factor on that as well.
Yeah.
And that's probably a whole separate discussion. But I'd say a big buying point in there, hovering around that top 3, is the price of the book as well. And the price of the book has got to match the quality of the cover and the quality of the blurb, and the reviews that you're seeing as well. If there are any on there, they've got to match the kind of the overall quality that you're seeing, for people to spend the money on it.
Yeah, absolutely. People success. Well, I had to put it without sounding a pretentious again. Success attracts success, so to speak, doesn't it? So if you've got someone who's got a knock together cover that they've taken from clip art, where you've got that same spaceship which seems to be on every single cover that you see, that's pulled together from stock art, I think we know the one that we mean. Then I'll be honest, that's pretty much a turn off for me. So because it says that person's not been confident enough in the work to invest in it. I do get the sort of struggling first artist stage and bootstrapping things from the beginning, but equally, for a lot of people, that's a risk that you're happy to let other people take, in terms of let them buy the book and get that author successful. Whereas, so I think going in raw and with a real high quality cover can make things stand out massively. I certainly know that when I browse Amazon.com, and I especially like to look in the new releases section, you sort of have a filter through. My eyes aren't drawn to the ones which are it also almost automatically discounts the ones that are bootstrapped, and my eyes are drawn to the ones that are clearly a good Jamie or a good Tom or one of the other many fantastic cover artists that are out there, and that even goes to new authors as well. If I know that a new author's come in, one of our friends, Joshua James, is a classic example. He burst onto the scene, with a whole set of amazing Tom Edwards covers, and immediately he just looks like someone who's been there for years, and you've got an immense amount of confidence in the product you're going to get at the other end. Because simply speaking, if I know that someone's invested in the cover, I know that they've probably invested in the editing and or everything that goes into that story as well. It just shows that they've done that.
Yeah, especially with Joshua, he came into the scene with professional, totally genre spot on book covers. He came out with a professional website straight away. Automatically, at no point would I look at that setup and assume that he hasn't had a top edit on it. There's no way that assumption would have crept in, because it's packaged well. It looks like you're getting your money's worth, and with Joshua's books, you are getting your money's worth. Yeah,
absolutely. So the first bite is with the eye. Is it can be my sort of effective summary of my view on it.
Let's be honest, we're fickle creatures. We have short attention spans. Even worse nowadays, where people can't sit still for more than 40 minutes because that's the average length of time that the streaming show they watch lasts per episode. We're becoming very, very short attention span as a species. So if you don't grab someone's attention pretty much straight away and keep it, people are just going to scroll on to the next thing. There's very little, because everything's so accessible. There's less thought goes into buying a book nowadays, because they're a lot cheaper. They're instantly accessible without you having to go to a shop, and we've flooded the market with self-published books, so the choice is massive.
Yeah, and you've got to give yourself every single advantage. I mean, I do call into question sometimes when you see the and you know, I've never been particularly sort of one who's fallen into the us versus them in the indie versus trad, but often you see the sort of most high quality covers coming from your indie market, where it does feel something like a lot of the trad publishers rely a lot more on you know, traditional marketing routes and whatnot. Again, to harken back to one of the most successful books of, was it last year or the year before, Adam Tchaikovsky's Children of Time, and yeah, we're looking at it, and that same spaceship I was telling you about, which appears on lots of people's independent covers, who put it together in Stockholm, is there. So clearly the publisher of like one of the most successful books in of a couple of years ago has done the indie publishing. The key difference there is that they've been able to support it with a massive marketing thrust, get it in front of the newspapers, get it in front of you know, significant websites, rather than whereas we can't rely on that kind of thing. We can't rely on that massive support network, albeit unless it's one that we've generated ourselves, which quite a lot of people are doing, and banding together into collectives and supporting each other's launches and whatnot, when the idea that the rising tide lifts all boats. So I suppose, to take a step back from my view, it can work, but you've got to have something else which picks up that what your cover does, and I don't think we necessarily have that option. Your cover has to be of the highest quality you can achieve.
Yeah, I think that's the same. So, as you know, I've got a foot in both camps, and through my trad publisher for half my work, I've, as I said earlier, I played Diva, stamped my feet, and had the same designer that I use for the majority of my own books anyway. So you're right, you should get as far as your budget, as far as your capability, as far as your contacts allow, you should get the absolute best package that you can get at the time. And as John and I were saying earlier, be prepared to revisit that in the future. If that means a re-edit, if that means a redesign, then go for it.
Yeah, that's living documents, aren't they? Ultimately, we also want the best product we have, or best product we can do out the box. The best product we can do today might be able to be improved somehow in a year, 2 years time. So you know, always be cognizant that you can, whilst do the best product, be prepared to not die in a ditch about keeping it steady. There's a very good reason why there's been hundreds of editions of Lord of the Rings, and that's to keep it on point, and successfully so.
I've gone back. I've re-edited, I think, all of my books, and I've even found a couple of typos, a couple of grammar issues with stuff that's traditionally published, and raised that to the publisher as well. I firmly believe there is not one single document out there in book format that is perfect. Part of that is because a lot of top level editing is sometimes a matter of opinion, and one editor will be of the opinion that the other editor is completely wrong. But there is no book out there that does not need any form of updating or improvement. But at what point do you stop? At what point do you stop reviewing your own manuscript before it goes off to beta readers, to an editor? There is no upper limit on this.
One of our friends, Richard Fox, came out with a saying that I think it was a bit of a throwaway comment from him, and it probably came from his military background as much as anything, as much as his publishing background. But it was something that, as I say, it was a throwaway comment, but I actually took it and thought that's actually a really, really smart thing to say, which is perfection is the enemy of done. I've been there with a draft where you're going through it dozens of times. You're tweaking things, you're moving things around, and you're not willing to pull the trigger. You're not able to push the button because there's always just one more thing to do on it, and there always will be.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I cannot go back and read my first book. That took me a long time to write. It took me probably about 8-9 run-throughs myself. It then went through 2 proofreaders. It's been through 3 editors, 3 professional editors since, and I still cringe even just hearing the audible of it. So I can't go back and revisit that, because I'd add 20,000 words to it and change the whole story. So you also got to know when enough is enough, and just leave it where it is.
Yeah, and I think that's in the context of book covers, that is also true. You have to at some point publish your book. Don't sit there for 6 months trying to do, I don't know, don't go and work at McDonald's for 6 months as sort of extra shifts on top of your normal job just so you can afford £1,000 book cover. You don't need to do that. You're better off getting a sensibly priced book cover, publishing your work, getting the next one out, and using the money from those books to get better covers in the future. If the ones that you've been able to afford so far don't quite hit the nail on the head, and you're probably going to want to need to replace them in the future anyway. So you don't want to don't get emotionally attached to your covers. Your covers are just there to sell things, just like the ad copy in your adverts is there to sell things. It's not something that you want to it's not a puppy. You don't have to love it. You like your cover, but bear in mind it is a marketing tool, and you should expect that in the future tastes will change, and if your genre changes the focus of covers, and that does and continues to happen, you will maybe want to recover the whole series in 2, 3, 4 years, and give it another big marketing push, and you'll see it come back up the ranks. And it's not just me saying that. There are lots of people in the indie community who've got long-term series that they've relaunched or given a new push to, and quite a lot of people now are pointing out that they think that you're going to want to recover your books fairly often in some cases, but it will be highly dependent on the genre. If the covers stay the same across the genre, that isn't going to be so urgent, as long as you've got to the standard of cover that works. Another thing I'd like to touch on is branding. If you've got a series or multiple series, having branding that is similar is really helpful. So for instance, the typography wants to be the same across your whole series, or similar enough depending on how it's done, that when somebody sees that book, their brain is getting the strongest signal it can that it's your book, that it's in line with this set that they've already seen. Maybe they bought the first few books. If you've got consistent branding, so the human brain is evolved to recognize patterns in things. That's why we recognize patterns in things that aren't there. Like if you look at clouds and you go, oh, that's a dog. That's because your brain has a dog recognition pattern. It's not because that cloud looks anything like a dog. It just looks sufficiently like a dog for your brain to recognize it. It does the same thing with book covers. It will learn what your favorite authors' book covers look like and your favorite genres. You don't know that that's happening, but when you see those thumbnails, your brain is like, oh, yeah, I've got a connection here. I'm spotting a pattern. So having consistent branding is really helpful, and that's why it also helps that to have the same cover artist for all of the books in the series. If you swapped cover artist, you might have 5 really great fantasy pictures that are brilliant for the fantasy genre, but they're actually done by 5 completely different artists in a different style. That probably isn't going to work very well. There might be beautiful pictures. There might be
turn off there, aren't you?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there are exceptions to that rule. Probably the best exception to that one. And as with anything we say, this is just our view, and there are exceptions to every example. Again, we covered it with Josh, who's writing in the universe, and Lauren, who was one of the editors. But the Galaxy's Edge series, for example, they actually alternate cover artists, and there's I don't know whether there's any sort of deep analysis into it, but my view is having read a few of them now, is that you've kind of got 2 strands of that story, where you've got one that's sort of quite a hard science fiction, military science fiction strand, which covers the Legionnaires, and then you've got another strand which is more a swashbuckling kind of
more practical,
Star Wars thing. And so when they're doing the and they roughly alternate. So when they're doing the hard science fiction military stand, they've got one type of art which covers that. Even though they're all in one series, I know immediately which hold on a second, are we covering the Legionnaires here, or are we covering the pirates? Right, I know which one I'm covering.
Yeah, but that in itself speaks to the branding just with another layer. I think you know what you're getting. You know you're getting a Galaxy's Edge book. As Ralph said, you know which strand of that storyline you're going to get up just because of the cover art. So yes, they're different, but they're still very much down the same parallel path.
Yeah,
probably helps you.
If you're going to go down that route, make sure it's a decision, not that it's something you stumble into. So I know for my upcoming series, I've got 2 artists who are working on it, or have done cover arts for the first 3. But
when are you getting this out, by the way?
I'm working on it. There, it's just being peddled on street corners as we speak. But yeah, they match each other closely enough that I think we kind of overcome sort of any differences, but each brings like a little bit of something different to the art. Have you guys spoken about the process of building cover art yet?
We touched on more of an overview at the beginning.
Okay, fine. Won't sort of dive back into that too much.
I think that would be a good topic for another conversation. Just selecting art itself, rather than because you've got the one-stop shop where you go to a cover designer who does that for you. Then you've got the option of hiring somebody to do custom art, and that's generally going to be, not always, but it's generally going to be more expensive than going to a cover designer. But there are obviously lots of very, very talented artists out there who are early in their career. So if you're willing to do the work, you can find them and then have a cover designer create a cover with their artwork. But what I would say is, if you're a new author, the chances are you are not an exceptional human being. The chances are that you are not a maverick or a genius, and that you are not preternaturally lucky. So yes, I'm all for things like Galaxy's Edge, where they've got an unusual series there, and that it kind of has different focuses on different genres. There's a more hard sci-fi bit in some of it, and more military in others, and the tone of the stories is a little bit different, and it's a great world. But that's 2 experienced authors, and it's probably the exception to the rule. So when you're making your business decisions, and your cover is a business decision, what I would say is go with what is going to make the most business sense. Don't try and put yourself in an exceptional position unless you really, really know what you're doing, or you're willing to take the risk, because your early goal, if you're looking to make this a career, is to be stable. It's not to, you can't publish a book and it be The Martian. That just doesn't happen. That didn't happen to Andy. Yeah. I mean, he didn't plan for that to happen the way it did. It just did, and you can't predict that kind of luck, or the J.K. Rowling kind of luck.
I think to be honest, on that note, a lot of us, especially with the indie market, none of us who've, again, like Ralph, it sounds a bit pretentious, none of us who've had any kind of unexpected success set out with that goal or those kind of figures in mind. It happened, and so it happened to me overnight, completely changed my life. And none of what I did initially was deliberate, informed, or in any way experienced. It's only now, 3 years down the line, I've learned more about it. And as I said earlier, I still find myself in the position of knowing absolutely sod all about what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have conversations with some of the most successful people in the market, and sometimes we're in a privileged position. We can have the kind of conversations that perhaps some of the fans might struggle with, and you go, "How were you successful?" And you know the answer straight away, because they just go, "I don't know."
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know I
with a laptop, mate.
literally had some kind of view of it paying for my lunch money. Next thing I know, I'm driving around in a brand new car. It's like, you know, you don't know how these things can happen, and you can't ever sort of gauge how successful these things are. Some things just capture the market and some things don't. Just to touch on something you said, Devon, earlier about sort of exceptionalism. Here's perhaps a story to make people think about, you know, if you are going to branch out and try something different, then perhaps even the most successful people aren't able to make that work. So, for example, Hugh Howey, of Wall fame, he, yeah, one of the most successful indie authors of all time. Although I think he seems to have disappeared now, and he's sailing around the world on his yacht, which goes to show how successful he was. He was one of the initial market leaders in indie books, and he came out with a theory with cover art, which was, why am I, for want of a better phrase, polluting a beautiful piece of art with words and stuff, when Amazon descriptive contain all that information. And so his theory was, rather than putting any text on there whatsoever, he would just literally have a beautiful piece of cover art and then rely on the description to convey any kind of information. His basic as the title and who wrote it. None of that was on the cover.
Yeah,
one of the most successful people in the market couldn't make that work. So when you're thinking about exceptionalism, you know, probably someone's had a crack at it before and it's either worked or not worked. If it has worked, then it's helped to evolve and shape the market. If it hasn't worked, it's died a death somewhere. So you know, so be prepared if you want to be exceptional, be prepared to take the risks and be prepared to disappear. Hugh Howey, you know, that wasn't going to make him disappear, not at all. You know, it's something he had a go at, and he pretty much wrote it off. He couldn't make it work. But if you, with 1 or 2 books under your belt, want to have a crack at something new, be prepared that, you know, that might mean that your stuff will disappear under the waves and never be seen again.
Yes, same as what's inside your book. You might actually be the only person that gets it, which isn't going to sell. And as we said off air, let's be perfectly honest, no writer is in this to be a philanthropist. It is a business, it is an industry, and we are trying to make money. As I said to John, I don't want to have to go back to work and do real people things. I quite like staying inside. When you're doing my dirty washing, I have very few outside people clothes, and that's the way I like it. But just touching back on the point earlier, the advice to any new authors looking at a cover, we've established that you can't, unless you've got the contacts or the skills, you can't skimp out on a cheap cover. You've got to package your story right. But one thing from my point of view is, I will say, when I started out designing covers, I tried to be too controlling, too prescriptive. So I ended up trying to get basically 4 or 5 chapters played out in a single still image. And it's the designer I use now, Claire at Spurwing. She turned around and pulled me up on it, saying, just how about you leave me to come up with something? So I sat there biting my nails for 2 days, and she came up with something that was better than what I'd imagined and was completely unable to explain what I wanted. So to find a cover designer, trust them, see what ideas they come up with. Have a concept, not an idea.
There are as much artists with cover artists and cover designers have as much of a cover community as writers do a writers community. Remember that as one key point. The second thing is they won't write your damn book for you. You don't draw the damn art for them.
Yeah, you don't hire an electrician and then tell them what to do you?
So they will influence. You know, they of course have got to have a cover that represents the story, and you've got to give them the guidance and whatnot to do that correctly. But equally, they've got to interpret things. I mean, I'm in an interesting relationship somewhat with Jamie, which is probably a little bit atypical in that because of the universe I'm writing in, actually some of the art he's coming out with is influencing what I write.
I'm exactly the same position with exactly the same designer with you. I have him make my covers before I finish the book, and they are influencing how I'm writing it.
Yeah, and then that's definitely a softer topic. There is nothing more bloody inspirational than having a cover. The first time you get your cover through, you're like, I've got to go back now and review everything, and like it's suddenly that's probably when I get a piece of cover art through. It's probably the moment when a manuscript goes from being a Word doc sat on my hard drive to something real and tangible, and that it suddenly becomes something that is going to be what we'll see on Amazon for no other reason. One key reason is obviously by that point I've invested substantial amount of money in some big dollars gone somewhere for that, but it does make things feel real, and don't underestimate that soft encouragement of suddenly actually having something visual to tie into, to see about a book that you've written. It's an amazing thing to have.
I've done exactly what you've done in terms of revisiting it. It's another it's a Jamie Glover one. I don't know if you can see that in the light. His interpretation based on the description of that alien there made me go back and revisit the entire manuscript and change it, because my imagination's come up with them, but seeing what my imagination has been interpreted by the designer who's built that whole model, this articulated alien, he's actually taken my idea, he's made it a real thing, a tangible thing, which has then re-influenced my understanding of what I've created, and I've gone back and changed the book as a result. So as Ralph said, you can't underestimate the power of having the visual interpretation of your words to work with.
Yeah, and I think that's a much better way around to do it than at the start of the book process. Say, can you do me a cover, and I want it to show exactly this, this, and this, and this is how I describe things, and try and do all this for me, and try and create this scene in my book. Much better to do it the other way around and go, well, he's done this, I like that, brilliant. I'll mention a couple of the features of that artwork. So has anybody got anything else to say, or shall we wrap this one up?
I'm good on covers.
Okay, Ralph?
No, it's a how long's a piece of string conversation, really. So, but I think
I've realised that Google Hangouts doesn't actually tell me how long the conversation we've had is. So,
I'd love to touch on process a little bit, but I think that's best in its own show to give it the time and space it deserves.
Yeah, I think we can talk more about different aspects of book cover design in a future show, and we've covered a lot of the important stuff here for both the interest of readers and the education of new writers who are still trying to work out what they're supposed to do with their covers and what makes business sense when you're looking at buying covers. So thank you very much for listening, everyone, and we'll be doing another. We'll be doing episodes weekly. We've decided we're going to release them on Saturdays at 6 p.m, which you'll probably already know by the time you see this. So I realise it's kind of useless information, but that's the plan. We're trying to release these episodes.
Does that mean we're going to have to get Christmas trees up sometime in like late September?
If we're the type of people who have Christmas trees, then maybe.
We're the kind of people who have children, so the kind of people who have. Definitely have to have
hordes of children, Devon, hordes.
Maybe we can add some kind of tinsel border if we don't get it.
Let's just wear cracker hats.
We'll have to figure it out where you if we in then it'll come out on Christmas here. So
cracker hats are a problem for me, because even if I wasn't wearing the headphones, they usually split the moment they go on my ginormous head, because they're never ever big enough. So,
anyone the other side by cracker hats.
What was that, Ralph? I'm guessing it was obscene.
You've got so much brainage going on. That's what's doing it.
Sadly, I think it's actually a thick skull, but
I'll go with the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone other side of the Atlantic doesn't know what a cracker hat is, as in Christmas crackers, you pull them inside. You've got a little paper hat, which for normal people doesn't normally fit. For me, with my micro head, it does actually slide around. Luckily, I've got the ears to keep it up there. Yeah, slight little bit of education there. So yeah, we're happy with covers. And what's our next decision made on the next topic? What are we going with? What were the suggestions we had? Were genre crossovers. That was one. Do you remember any others?
Yes, but I closed that document because we weren't doing that. Right, hang on, give me a second, folks, and we can.
Another one for the list was obviously the cover design process, as opposed to sort of covers themselves.
Other questions we came up with off there were something Josh touched on his morning hay show the other day, which for anyone over here is kind of an early afternoon break, about the difference between readers and listeners. That the Audible market is, on the whole, the majority, a totally different buying market than the people who will read an author's books. So we've got readers who follow authors. Do we have listeners who follow authors, or do we have listeners who follow narrators? I don't know.
Great one. The other one is on the Keystroke Medium page. I posted a link that my girlfriend created, which was, she's in my better half is a comms expert who's worked for several large organisations over here, and she's been going to a number of seminars on how social media affects marketing, and she's kindly done a summary crib sheet for us that covers trends for 2019, what people see as emerging in 2019, so things like Facebook stories and how there's going to be a massive thrust towards them from Facebook, and various other things. So I think that might be worth covering as well.
Okay, so for all the listeners, we've got a range of topics that we might cover next. As you can, we'll try and get to the point where we're announcing these before the episodes come out. But for now, it's good night from me, and it's good night from Ralph, and it's good night from Devon, and we'll see you on the next show.